The sun beat down on Harmony Glades, a picture-perfect suburban haven where manicured lawns met meticulously planned community events. We, the Millers, were relatively new to the neighborhood, drawn in by the promise of a family-friendly environment and, of course, the sparkling community pool. Little did we know, that pool would soon become the epicenter of a drama we never could have imagined. The pool wasn't just a pool to us. It was a symbol of summer fun, a place for our kids, Lily and Tom, to splash and laugh with their friends. That IT was where my wife, Sarah, could unwind after a long day, and where I could finally escape the confines of my home office on the weekends. We spent countless hours there, creating memories that we thought would last a lifetime. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting, tensions were brewing. The Harmony Glades Homeowners Association, or HOA, was a force to be reckoned with, its rules and regulations often feeling arbitrary and suffocating. Small disagreements over lawn ornaments and parking spaces were commonplace, but we mostly kept to ourselves, trying to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. We soon learned that there was one resident who seemed to thrive on these conflicts. Patricia, whom we would later dub, in hushed tones, the HOA Karen. Patricia, a retired accountant with a penchant for perfectly coiffed hair and a perpetually disapproving frown, lived 2 doors down from us. She was known for her meticulous adherence to the HOA guidelines and her eagerness to report any perceived infraction. We'd heard stories about her measuring the height of neighbors' grass, scrutinizing their holiday decorations, and even complaining about the color of their front doors. While we had only exchanged polite nods in passing, we knew she was a force to be reckoned with. The pool, our sanctuary, was about to become her battleground, and we were about to become her unwitting adversaries in a conflict that would escalate far beyond petty HOA squabbles, reaching the attention of the Environmental Protection Agency and landing Patricia in a world of legal and financial trouble. The peace of Harmony Glades was about to be shattered. Patricia wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She seemed to derive a strange sense of power from enforcing them, or, more accurately, from finding ways to interpret them to her advantage. She'd been a resident of Harmony Glades since its inception, a fact she often brought up in HOA meetings, implying a kind of seniority that entitled her to special consideration. She knew the bylaws inside and out, and she wasn't afraid to wield them like a weapon. That we initially dismissed her as a harmless busybody, the kind of person every neighborhood seems to have. But as we spent more time in Harmony Glades, we started to see a pattern in her behavior. IT wasn't just about upholding the rules. It was about control. She seemed to resent anyone who didn't conform to her rigid standards of what a good neighbor should be. And unfortunately, we, with our slightly overgrown rose bushes and our occasional late-night barbecues, seemed to fall squarely into that category. Our first real run-in with Patricia was over a misplaced recycling bin that I had accidentally left it out on the curb a few hours past the designated pickup time. The next morning, I found a brightly colored violation notice stuck to our front door, citing a breach of HOA Regulation 3.2b, subsection 4, regarding the timely removal of refuse containers. The IT seemed excessive, even for an HOA, but I shrugged it off, chalking it up to Patricia's overzealousness. But the incidents kept piling up. That a complaint about our children's basketball hoop being unsightly, a passive-aggressive note about our dog, Buster, barking too early in the morning. Each incident was small on its own, but together they formed a clear pattern of harassment that we started to feel like we were living under constant surveillance, our every move being scrutinized by Patricia's watchful eyes. That IT was clear that Patricia had a particular interest in our property and our family. Maybe it was because we were newcomers, or maybe it was because we represented a different kind of lifestyle than she was used to. Whatever the reason, she had made it her mission to make our lives in Harmony Glades as uncomfortable as possible. We tried to ignore her, to rise above the petty squabbles, but her actions were starting to wear us down. The peace we had sought in this suburban haven was slowly being eroded by the relentless negativity of one woman, and soon, her actions would escalate from petty annoyances to something far more sinister, something that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The day it happened started like any other summer day in Harmony Glades. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass. The kids were already clamoring to go to the pool, eager to escape the boredom of summer vacation. Sarah and I, after a hurried breakfast, relented and packed up the usual pool paraphernalia. Towels, sunscreen, goggles, and a bag full of snacks. As we approached the pool gate, I noticed something was off. The usual cheerful chatter was absent, replaced by an unsettling silence that a small group of residents stood around the pool's edge, their faces etched with concern, and my heart skipped a beat. Had something happened? We hurried closer, pushing our way through the crowd, and then I saw it. The once crystal-clear water of the pool was now a murky, iridescent slick that a thick, oily film coated the surface, reflecting the sunlight in a disturbing rainbow of colors. The air hung heavy with the pungent smell of petroleum. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. An elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street from the pool, shook her head sadly. "Someone poured oil into the pool," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "I don't know who would do such a thing, but it's just awful." My mind raced. Who would do this? And why? The pool was the heart of our community, a place where families gathered and friendships were forged. To deliberately contaminate it seemed like an act of pure malice. The kids were devastated. Lily started to cry, her dreams of swimming dashed. Tom, usually so full of energy, stood silently, his face a mask of disappointment. I felt a surge of anger rising within me, a protective instinct kicking in. Someone had violated our community, and I was determined to find out. As I surveyed the scene, a nagging feeling crept into my mind, a feeling that this wasn't just a random act of vandalism, but a feeling that this was personal. And as I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, one face stood out. Patricia, standing slightly apart from the crowd, her expression unreadable that a chill ran down my spine. Could she be involved? It seemed impossible. Yet something about her demeanor made me uneasy. The idyllic facade of Harmony Glades had been shattered, revealing a dark undercurrent of malice and suspicion. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard anger. I needed to find out what had happened and who was responsible. My first instinct was to contact the HOA. Surely, they would take this seriously. I found the HOA president, a mild-mannered man named Bob, near the pool house, looking as bewildered as everyone else. "Bob, this is unbelievable," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Someone deliberately contaminated the pool. That we need to do something about this." Bob sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I know. It's terrible that I've already called the pool maintenance company, that they're sending someone out to assess the damage." "Assess the damage?" I exclaimed. "Bob, this is more than just damage. This is a criminal act. We need to call the police." Bob hesitated. "Well, let's not jump to conclusions," he said, his voice laced with caution. "Maybe it was just an accident. Maybe someone accidentally spilled something. Accidentally spilled several gallons of oil into the pool." I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "Come on, Bob, be realistic." He mumbled something about not wanting to cause unnecessary alarm and promised to discuss it with the other HOA board members. I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously. He probably wanted to avoid any confrontation or negative publicity. Frustrated by Bob's inaction, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That I started asking around, seeing if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious. That Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, said she had seen a figure near the pool late last night, but it was too dark to make out any details. That's when I decided to install security cameras. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone in Harmony Glades was deliberately targeting us. I purchased a discrete camera system and strategically placed them around our property, focusing on the pool area. It was a long shot, but I was desperate for answers. I told Sarah about my plan, and she, though initially hesitant, agreed that it was necessary, that we had to protect our family and our community, even if it meant sacrificing a little bit of our privacy. Little did we know, those cameras would soon reveal a truth more shocking and disturbing than we could have ever imagined. The waiting game began, filled with anxiety and a growing sense of unease. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. That I spent hours reviewing the security footage, fast-forwarding and rewinding, searching for any sign of suspicious activity. Most of the footage was uneventful. Squirrels scampering across the lawn, neighbors walking their dogs, the occasional delivery truck. But then, on the third night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. That it was around 2:00 a.m. The footage was grainy and dark, but the figure was unmistakable. That a woman, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, was walking towards the pool carrying a large container. She moved with a determined stride, her posture rigid and purposeful. As she reached the pool's edge, she paused, glancing around as if to make sure she wasn't being watched. Then, without hesitation, she upended the container and poured its contents into the water. The dark liquid gurgled and splashed, spreading across the surface of the pool. The woman stood there for a moment, watching her handiwork, before turning and walking away, disappearing into the shadows. I zoomed in on the footage, trying to get a better look at her face, and then I saw it. A distinctive silver bracelet on her wrist, one that I had seen Patricia wearing countless times. I replayed the footage again and again, each time confirming my worst fears. It was Patricia. There was no doubt in my mind. The HOA Karen, the woman who had made it her mission to make our lives miserable, had deliberately poisoned our community pool. I felt a surge of anger so intense that I could barely breathe. How could she do something so malicious, so reckless, so utterly insane? The pool wasn't just a pool. It was a symbol of our community, a place where our children played and where friendships were forged. To defile it in such a way was an act of pure evil. I immediately showed the footage to Sarah. She was equally shocked and horrified, but we spent the rest of the night discussing what to do. We knew we had to report it to the authorities, but we also knew that this was going to be a long and complicated process. We were about to enter a battle that would pit us against our neighbor, the HOA, and potentially the entire community. But we were determined to see justice served. Patricia had crossed a line, and we were not going to let her get away with it. The fight for Harmony Glades had begun. The next morning, armed with the security footage, I marched straight to Bob's house. The HOA president. I hammered on his door until he groggily answered, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Bob, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. I showed him the footage. He watched in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each passing second. When it was over, he just stared blankly at the screen, unable to speak. "That's Patricia," I said, breaking the silence. "She deliberately contaminated the pool. I have video evidence. We need to call the police immediately." Bob finally found his voice, but it was weak and hesitant. I don't know what to say," he stammered. This is unbelievable." "Unbelievable, Bob? This is a crime. She poisoned the pool. What are you going to do about it?" He wrung his hands nervously. I need to talk to the other board members," he said. "We need to discuss this." "Discuss it? Bob, there's nothing to discuss. We have video evidence of her committing a crime. We need to call the police." He hesitated again, his face a mask of indecision. "Look, I understand your anger," he said, "but Patricia has been a member of this community for a long time. She's on the landscaping committee, the social committee. She's very involved." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously defending her?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "She committed a crime. Her community involvement doesn't give her a free pass." He sighed. "I'm not defending her, but we need to be careful that we don't want to jump to conclusions. We need to investigate this thoroughly." "Investigate? Bob, we have video evidence. What more investigation do you need?" It became clear that Bob was unwilling to take decisive action, that he was more concerned about protecting the HOA's reputation and avoiding conflict than about seeking justice for the crime that had been committed. I left his house feeling defeated and enraged. The HOA, the very organization that was supposed to protect our community, was failing us. I knew then that we were on our own. If we wanted justice, we would have to fight for it ourselves. The battle against Patricia had just become a battle against the entire HOA, and I was ready to fight. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and tense meetings. I tried to rally support from other residents, showing them the security footage and explaining the HOA's inaction. Some were sympathetic, expressing their outrage at Patricia's behavior, but many were hesitant to get involved, fearing retribution from the HOA or simply wanting to avoid conflict. It became clear that Patricia had a powerful network of allies within the community. She had cultivated relationships with key members of the HOA board and had a reputation for being litigious, which made people wary of crossing her. The HOA board, after several closed-door meetings, issued a statement acknowledging the incident, but refusing to name Patricia as the suspect. They claimed that they were conducting a thorough investigation and would take appropriate action once all the facts were gathered. Their statement was a blatant attempt to sweep the incident under the rug. They were protecting Patricia, plain and simple. I felt a surge of betrayal. The HOA was supposed to represent the interests of all residents, not just a select few. Frustrated by the HOA's inaction, I decided to seek outside help. I contacted a local news station, hoping to bring attention to the situation and pressure the HOA to take action. I also consulted with a lawyer, exploring our legal options. The lawyer explained that we could potentially sue Patricia for damages, but it would be a long and expensive process. He also warned us that the HOA could try to retaliate against us for speaking out against them. Despite the risks, we decided to move forward. That we couldn't let Patricia get away with what she had done. We had to hold her accountable for her actions. The news story aired that evening, featuring the security footage and an interview with me and Sarah. The story quickly went viral, sparking outrage online and in the local community. People were appalled by Patricia's behavior and the HOA's inaction. The pressure on the HOA began to mount. Residents started demanding answers and calling for Patricia's resignation. The HOA board was forced to call an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. The peaceful facade of Harmony Glades was crumbling, revealing a deep-seated conflict that threatened to tear the community apart. The stakes were higher than ever, and we were in the middle of a full-blown war. The viral news story had an immediate impact. The HOA, scrambling to contain the damage, finally announced that Patricia had been suspended from all HOA activities pending further investigation. But it wasn't enough. The public outcry demanded more. It was then that I decided to contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. That it dawned on me that pouring oil into a community pool wasn't just a petty act of vandalism. It was a serious environmental crime. I explained the situation to an EPA agent, providing them with the security footage and the HOA's statement. The agent listened intently, taking copious notes. That he informed me that the EPA would launch an investigation into the incident, focusing on the potential environmental impact of the oil contamination. He explained that oil spills can have devastating effects on aquatic ecosystems, contaminating water sources and harming wildlife. The EPA's involvement raised the stakes significantly. What had started as a neighborhood dispute had now become a federal case. Patricia was no longer just facing the wrath of the community. She was facing the full force of the United States government. The EPA investigators arrived in Harmony Glades a few days later. They were a team of serious-looking men and women in dark suits, armed with clipboards and testing equipment. They cordoned off the pool area, collecting water samples and soil samples. They interviewed residents, including me, Sarah, Bob, and, of course, Patricia. Patricia, who had initially remained silent and defiant, suddenly became cooperative, hiring a high-powered lawyer and issuing a public apology. She claimed that she had made a terrible mistake and that she was deeply remorseful for her actions, but no one was buying it. The security footage spoke for itself. The EPA investigation dragged on for weeks, creating a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere in Harmony Glades. The community was divided, with some residents supporting Patricia and others calling for her to be held accountable. The HOA was in disarray, struggling to maintain order and control. The once peaceful suburban haven had become a battleground, a symbol of the growing divisions in American society. And at the center of it all was Patricia, the HOA Karen, whose petty grievances had spiraled into a full-blown environmental disaster. The consequences of her actions were about to become far more severe than she could have ever imagined. The EPA's investigation wasn't just about punishing Patricia. It was about assessing the environmental damage and ensuring that the pool and surrounding area were properly cleaned up. The lead EPA investigator, a sharp woman named Agent Davies, explained to me the complexities of the situation. "Mr. Miller, what Ms. Henderson did is a violation of the Clean Water Act," she said, referring to Patricia. "This act prohibits the discharge of pollutants, including oil, into navigable waters of the United States. Even though the pool is man-made and contained, it's still considered a water source that can potentially impact the surrounding environment." She went on to explain that the oil could seep into the ground, contaminating the soil and potentially reaching the local groundwater supply. That it could also harm wildlife, such as birds and insects that might come into contact with the contaminated water. The EPA's investigation involved a multi-step process. First, they collected water and soil samples to determine the extent of the contamination. They then analyzed the samples in a lab to identify the type of oil and its concentration. Based on the results, they would develop a remediation plan to clean up the affected area. The remediation plan involved draining the pool, removing the contaminated water and soil, and treating the remaining surfaces with special cleaning agents. The entire process was expected to take several weeks and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Agent Davies also explained that Patricia could face severe penalties, including hefty fines and even jail time. The exact amount of the fine would depend on the severity of the environmental damage and Patricia's willingness to cooperate with the investigation. The potential for a $500,000 fine stemmed from the combination of factors: the volume of oil dumped, the potential for environmental damage, and the deliberate nature of the act. The EPA takes such violations very seriously, especially when they involve intentional acts of pollution. As the EPA investigation continued, the atmosphere in Harmony Glades grew increasingly toxic. Neighbors stopped speaking to each other, and the HOA meetings became shouting matches. The community that had once been so idyllic was now fractured and divided. The oil spill had not only contaminated the pool, it had contaminated the very fabric of our community, and we were all paying the price. The EPA investigation was meticulous and thorough. Agent Davies and her team spent days at the pool, meticulously documenting every detail. They took dozens of water and soil samples, sending them to a specialized lab for analysis. They interviewed every resident who had access to the pool, including the HOA board members, the pool maintenance staff, and, of course, Patricia. The interviews were tense and uncomfortable. Agent Davies was a skilled interrogator, able to extract information even from the most reluctant witnesses. She pressed Patricia hard, questioning her about her motives, her actions, and her relationship with the Miller family. Patricia, represented by her lawyer, maintained her story of a terrible mistake, claiming that she had accidentally poured the oil into the pool while trying to dispose of it. But Agent Davies wasn't buying it. She had seen the security footage, and she knew that Patricia's actions were deliberate and malicious. She also knew that Patricia had a history of conflicts with the Miller family and other residents. The EPA's investigation also revealed that the type of oil used in the contamination was used motor oil, which is particularly harmful to the environment. Used motor oil contains heavy metals and other toxins that can persist in the environment for years, causing long-term damage to ecosystems. Agent Davies emphasized the severity of the environmental regulations, explaining that the Clean Water Act was designed to protect the nation's water resources from pollution. She warned that anyone who violated the act would be held accountable for their actions. As the EPA investigation progressed, the pressure on Patricia intensified. The community turned against her, and even her closest allies began to distance themselves. She became a pariah, ostracized and isolated. The HOA, desperate to salvage its reputation, finally took decisive action, voting to remove Patricia from all HOA committees and activities. They also issued a public statement condemning her actions and pledging to cooperate fully with the EPA investigation. The situation in Harmony Glades had reached a boiling point. The EPA investigation had exposed the dark underbelly of our community, revealing the petty grievances, the power struggles, and the deep-seated divisions that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. And it all started with a single act of malice: Patricia pouring oil into our community pool. Patricia's initial reaction to the allegations was denial, pure and simple. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, dismissing the security footage as a fabrication or a case of mistaken identity. She claimed that the woman in the video was not her and that the bracelet was a common design that could belong to anyone. However, as the evidence mounted and the EPA investigation intensified, her defense began to crumble. She hired a high-powered lawyer, a slick and expensive attorney named Mr. Harding, who advised her to change her strategy. It was then that she issued her public apology, claiming that it was all a terrible mistake. Her new defense was that she had been trying to dispose of used motor oil properly, but had accidentally tripped and spilled it into the pool. She claimed that she was distraught over the accident and had intended to report it to the HOA, but had been too embarrassed and ashamed. It was a flimsy and unconvincing story. But it was the best Mr. Harding could come up with. He tried to portray Patricia as a kind and well-meaning woman who had made a regrettable error in judgment. He emphasized her long history of community involvement and her dedication to Harmony Glades. But no one was buying it. The security footage showed a woman deliberately pouring oil into the pool, not accidentally spilling it. And Patricia's history of petty grievances and conflicts with other residents made it clear that her actions were motivated by malice, not mistake. That Mr. Harding also tried to argue that the EPA's investigation was an overreaction and that the potential environmental damage was minimal. He claimed that the pool was just a small, contained body of water and that the oil had been quickly cleaned up. But Agent Davies countered that the Clean Water Act was designed to protect all water resources, regardless of their size. She also pointed out that the potential for long-term environmental damage was significant, even if the immediate impact was minimal. As the legal battle raged on, Patricia became increasingly isolated and desperate. She lost her friends, her reputation, and her sense of security. The community that she had once controlled had turned against her, and she was now facing the consequences of her actions. The HOA Karen was finally learning that even the most meticulously planned acts of malice can have unintended and devastating consequences. The news story about Patricia and the oil spill went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media. The hashtag HOA Karen became a trending topic, and Patricia's name was plastered across news websites and online forums. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. People were outraged by Patricia's actions, condemning her as a selfish and entitled bully who had deliberately harmed her community and the environment. They mocked her flimsy excuses and ridiculed her attempts to portray herself as a victim. Social media became a battleground, with people sharing memes, jokes, and scathing commentary about Patricia. Her personal information was leaked online, and she was bombarded with hateful messages and threats. The online shaming extended beyond Patricia herself. The HOA was also targeted, with people criticizing its initial inaction and its attempts to protect Patricia. The HOA's website was flooded with negative reviews, and its social media accounts were bombarded with angry comments. The public outcry wasn't limited to the online world. Protests were organized outside Patricia's house, with people carrying signs and chanting slogans. The protests were mostly peaceful, but they created a chaotic and uncomfortable atmosphere in Harmony Glades. Patricia became a recluse, rarely leaving her house. She was afraid of being recognized and harassed in public. She lost her friends and her social connections. She became a pariah, ostracized and isolated. The public shaming took a heavy toll on Patricia's mental and emotional health. She became depressed and anxious, struggling to cope with the constant barrage of negativity. She sought therapy and counseling, but it was difficult for her to escape the stigma and shame that had become attached to her name. The public outcry also had a significant impact on the HOA. The board members were forced to resign, and a new election was held. The new board members pledged to be more transparent and accountable to the community. They also promised to take stronger action against anyone who violated the HOA rules. The saga of the HOA Karen had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the power of public opinion and the consequences of unchecked power and privilege. The fight for Harmony Glades was far from over, but the tide had turned. The resignation of the HOA board members was just the beginning of the fallout within the organization. The HOA was now facing a full-blown crisis, with internal divisions, potential legal liabilities, and a damaged reputation. The remaining board members, scrambling to maintain control, called an emergency meeting to address the situation. The meeting was chaotic and contentious, with residents demanding answers and accountability. Accusations were hurled, and long-simmering grievances were aired. It became clear that the HOA was deeply divided. Some members believed that the HOA had acted appropriately, given the circumstances. Others felt that the HOA had been negligent in its handling of the situation and had prioritized protecting Patricia over the interests of the community. The HOA was also facing potential legal liabilities. Residents who had been affected by the oil spill could sue the HOA for damages. The EPA could also fine the HOA for failing to prevent the contamination. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover the costs of the cleanup, arguing that Patricia's actions were deliberate and malicious and therefore not covered under the policy. The HOA was now responsible for paying for the cleanup out of its own funds, which would likely bankrupt the organization. The HOA's reputation was in tatters. The community had lost faith in its ability to govern effectively and fairly. Membership declined, and many residents refused to pay their HOA dues. The new board members, elected in a landslide victory, inherited a mess. They faced the daunting task of rebuilding the HOA's reputation, restoring trust within the community, and addressing the financial and legal challenges that lay ahead. They implemented a series of reforms, including increasing transparency, strengthening enforcement of HOA rules, and establishing a clear process for handling complaints and disputes. They also reached out to the community, seeking input and feedback on how to improve the HOA. The process of rebuilding the HOA was slow and arduous. It took time to heal the divisions within the community and to restore faith in the organization. But slowly, the HOA began to regain its footing, and Harmony Glades began to heal. The saga of the HOA Karen had left a lasting scar on our community, but it had also taught us valuable lessons about the importance of accountability, transparency, and community responsibility. The legal battles began in earnest. The EPA filed charges against Patricia for violating the Clean Water Act, seeking a hefty fine and potentially even jail time. The criminal case against her would be a long and complex process, involving extensive legal wrangling and expert testimony. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were considering our own legal options. That we had suffered significant emotional distress as a result of Patricia's actions, and we wanted to hold her accountable for the harm she had caused. That we also believed that the HOA had been negligent in its handling of the situation and had failed to protect the interests of the community. After consulting with our lawyer, we decided to file a civil lawsuit against Patricia and the HOA. The lawsuit sought damages for emotional distress, property damage, and the cost of the pool cleanup. It also sought to hold the HOA accountable for its negligence and to force it to implement reforms to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. The civil lawsuit added another layer of complexity to the already tangled web of legal battles. Patricia now faced both criminal charges from the EPA and a civil lawsuit from us. The HOA faced a civil lawsuit from us and the potential for further legal action from other residents. The legal battles dragged on for months, consuming our time, energy, and financial resources. The community of Harmony Glades remained deeply divided, with some residents supporting Patricia and others supporting us. The atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable, and the once peaceful suburban haven felt like a war zone. As the legal battles progressed, more and more evidence of Patricia's malicious intent came to light. Witnesses testified about her history of petty grievances and her animosity towards the Miller family. Documents revealed that she had been planning the oil spill for months, researching the environmental impact of oil contamination and seeking ways to avoid detection. The evidence against Patricia was overwhelming, and it became clear that she would face severe consequences for her actions. The legal battles were far from over, but the tide had turned. Patricia was no longer in control. She was now at the mercy of the legal system, and the wheels of justice were slowly but surely grinding her down. The financial implications of Patricia's actions were staggering. The EPA's proposed $500,000 fine was based on a number of factors, including the volume of oil dumped into the pool, the potential for environmental damage, and the deliberate nature of the act. The Clean Water Act allows the EPA to impose significant penalties for violations, especially when they involve intentional acts of pollution. The fine was designed to serve as a deterrent, sending a message that environmental crimes will not be tolerated. It was also intended to cover the costs of the EPA's investigation and the remediation efforts. For Patricia, the $500,000 fine represented a potential financial catastrophe. She was a retired accountant, living on a fixed income. She didn't have the resources to pay such a large sum of money. Her lawyer, Mr. Harding, tried to negotiate a settlement with the EPA, arguing that Patricia was unable to pay the full amount of the fine, that he proposed a reduced fine and a payment plan. But the EPA was unwilling to budge. They wanted to send a strong message, and they weren't going to let Patricia off easy. In addition to the EPA fine, Patricia also faced significant legal fees. That Mr. Harding was an expensive lawyer, and his fees were mounting rapidly. She also had to pay for expert witnesses and other legal expenses. The civil lawsuit filed by Sarah and me added even more to her financial burden. We were seeking damages for emotional distress, property damage, and the cost of the pool cleanup that if we won the lawsuit, Patricia would be responsible for paying us a significant sum of money. The cost of the pool cleanup was also substantial. The EPA had ordered the HOA to drain the pool, remove the contaminated water and soil, and treat the remaining surfaces with special cleaning agents. The entire process cost tens of thousands of dollars. The HOA, already facing financial difficulties, was struggling to pay for the cleanup. They considered raising HOA dues or levying a special assessment on residents, but these options were met with strong opposition from the community. The financial implications of Patricia's actions rippled throughout Harmony Glades, affecting not only Patricia herself, but also the HOA and the entire community. The saga of the HOA Karen had become a financial disaster, adding even more stress and division to our already troubled community. The price of malice was proving to be incredibly high. The environmental remediation process was a long and arduous undertaking. The EPA oversaw the entire cleanup, ensuring that it was done properly and that all environmental regulations were followed. The first step was to drain the pool. A specialized company was hired to pump out the contaminated water and transport it to a treatment facility. The water had to be treated before it could be released back into the environment to remove the oil and other pollutants. Next, the contaminated soil around the pool had to be excavated. The soil was carefully removed and transported to a landfill that was equipped to handle hazardous waste. New, clean soil was brought in to replace the contaminated soil. The pool itself had to be thoroughly cleaned. The surfaces were scrubbed with special cleaning agents to remove any remaining oil residue. The cleaning process took several days to complete. The EPA also conducted extensive testing to ensure that the pool and the surrounding environment were free of contamination. They tested the water, the soil, and the air. The testing revealed that some oil had seeped into the groundwater, requiring further remediation efforts. The long-term effects of the oil spill were still uncertain. The EPA would continue to monitor the environment for years to come to ensure that there were no lasting impacts. The pool was finally reopened several months after the oil spill. The community celebrated the reopening, but the scars of the incident remained. The pool was no longer just a place to swim. It was a reminder of the conflict, the division, and the environmental damage that had been inflicted on our community. The remediation process cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars, further straining its already precarious finances. The community debated whether to raise HOA dues to cover the costs, but many residents opposed the idea. The environmental remediation process was a stark reminder of the consequences of Patricia's actions. Her petty grievances had not only caused emotional distress and financial hardship, they had also damaged the environment and threatened the health and well-being of our community. The cleanup served as a tangible reminder of the long-term impact of environmental crimes and the importance of protecting our planet. Patricia's downfall was complete and devastating. She faced social isolation, financial hardship, and the very real possibility of criminal charges. The social isolation was perhaps the most immediate and painful consequence. She lost her friends, her social connections, and her sense of belonging. The community that she had once controlled had turned against her, and she was now an outcast. People avoided her in public, whispering behind her back and casting disapproving glances. She became a pariah, ostracized and alone. She rarely left her house, fearing the judgment and scorn of others. The financial hardship was also severe. The $500,000 EPA fine loomed over her like a death sentence. She had to sell her house to pay for her legal fees and the potential fine. She was forced to downsize and move into a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. She lost her savings and her retirement income. She was forced to rely on government assistance to make ends meet. She was no longer the powerful and privileged HOA Karen. She was now a struggling and vulnerable senior citizen. The potential criminal charges added another layer of stress and anxiety to her life. If convicted of violating the Clean Water Act, she could face jail time. The thought of spending time in prison terrified her. As the legal battles dragged on, Patricia's mental and emotional health deteriorated. She became depressed and despondent, losing hope for the future. She struggled to cope with the shame, the guilt, and the regret. She had destroyed her own life with her petty grievances and her malicious actions. She had become a victim of her own making. In the end, Patricia reached a plea agreement with the EPA. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and agreed to pay a reduced fine. She also agreed to perform community service and to undergo environmental education. She avoided jail time, but she paid a heavy price for her actions. She lost her reputation, her financial security, and her sense of belonging. She became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of malice and the importance of accountability. The HOA Karen had fallen, and her downfall served as a stark warning to anyone who might be tempted to abuse their power or harm their community. Looking back on the entire ordeal, it's hard not to feel a sense of sadness and loss that we came to Harmony Glades seeking a peaceful and idyllic community, and for a brief time, we found it. But Patricia's actions shattered that illusion, revealing a dark underbelly of petty grievances, power struggles, and malicious intent. The loss of community is perhaps the most painful consequence. The trust that once bound us together has been eroded, and the divisions that were exposed during the crisis remained. It will take time, perhaps years, to heal the wounds and rebuild the sense of community that we once shared. The pool, once a symbol of our community, now serves as a constant reminder of the conflict and the environmental damage that was inflicted upon us. It's hard to look at it without feeling a sense of sadness and regret. But despite the sadness and the loss, I also feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We stood up for what was right, and we held Patricia accountable for her actions. That we refused to be bullied or intimidated, and we fought for justice, even when it was difficult and costly. The importance of holding people accountable cannot be overstated. If we had allowed Patricia to get away with her actions, it would have sent a message that such behavior is acceptable. It would have emboldened others to abuse their power and harm their community. By holding Patricia accountable, we sent a clear message that such behavior will not be tolerated. That we showed that even the most powerful and privileged individuals are not above the law, and that they will be held responsible for their actions. The ordeal taught us valuable lessons about the importance of community responsibility, environmental protection, and the power of collective action. It also taught us about the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to overcome adversity. Harmony Glades will never be the same, but we are determined to rebuild our community and to create a better future for ourselves and our children. The scars of the HOA Karen will always be with us, but they will also serve as a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right and fighting for a more just and equitable world. The fight was exhausting, but ultimately worth it. The saga of the HOA Karen offers several valuable lessons about HOA power, environmental responsibility, and conflict resolution. Firstly, it highlights the potential for abuse of power within HOAs. HOAs are often governed by a small group of individuals who may not always act in the best interests of the community. The Harmony Glades HOA initially prioritized protecting Patricia, a longtime member, over seeking justice for the crime that had been committed. This underscores the importance of transparency, accountability, and community involvement in HOA governance. Residents need to be vigilant in holding their HOAs accountable and ensuring that they are acting fairly and equitably. Secondly, the incident underscores the importance of environmental responsibility. Patricia's actions, though seemingly petty, had significant environmental consequences. The oil spill contaminated the pool, damaged the surrounding environment, and threatened the health and well-being of the community. This serves as a reminder that even small acts of pollution can have a big impact, and that we all have a responsibility to protect our planet. Thirdly, the saga highlights the importance of effective conflict resolution. The conflict between Patricia and the Miller family escalated over time, eventually leading to the oil spill. This underscores the need for HOAs to have clear and effective processes for resolving disputes and preventing conflicts from escalating. Mediation, communication, and compromise are essential tools for resolving disagreements and building a stronger community. Furthermore, the incident demonstrates the power of collective action. When the HOA failed to take action, the community rallied together to demand justice. Residents organized protests, contacted the media, and supported the Miller family in their legal battle. This shows that when people work together, they can overcome even the most powerful adversaries. Finally, the saga serves as a reminder that actions have consequences. Patricia's actions had devastating consequences for herself, her community, and the environment. Her story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of malice, the importance of accountability, and the need to treat others with respect and compassion. The lessons learned from the HOA Karen will hopefully prevent similar incidents from happening in other communities and will inspire people to take action to protect their environment and their communities. Did Patricia face justice? In a legal sense, yes. She was held accountable for her actions, facing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. She paid a heavy price, losing her reputation, her financial security, and her sense of belonging. Was the pool restored? Yes. After months of remediation efforts, the pool was reopened, but it was never quite the same. The scars of the oil spill remained, serving as a constant reminder of the conflict and the environmental damage that had been inflicted upon our community. Did the HOA change its policies? Yes. The HOA implemented a series of reforms, increasing transparency, strengthening enforcement of HOA rules, and establishing a clear process for handling complaints and disputes. The new board members were more accountable to the community and more responsive to their concerns. But was there a sense of closure? That's a more difficult question to answer in some ways. Yes, there was a sense of closure. Patricia was held accountable for her actions, the pool was restored, and the HOA implemented reforms. But in other ways, there was no closure. The divisions within the community remained, and the trust that had once bound us together was gone. The scars of the HOA Karen would always be with us. Sarah and I eventually decided to move away from Harmony Glades. The memories of the conflict were too painful, and we wanted to start fresh in a new community. That we sold our house and moved to a small town in the mountains, where we found peace and tranquility that we still think about. Harmony Glades from time to time, and we wonder how the community is doing. That we hope that they have been able to heal the wounds and rebuild the sense of community that was lost. The saga of the HOA Karen was a difficult and painful chapter in our lives, but it also taught us valuable lessons about the importance of standing up for what is right, fighting for justice, and protecting our environment. And those lessons will stay with us forever. While the legal battles ended, the emotional and social repercussions lingered, prompting us to seek a fresh start, leaving behind the fractured community for a more peaceful existence. The story of the HOA Karen serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the critical importance of environmental protection, and the fundamental need for community responsibility. Unchecked power, whether wielded by an individual or an organization, can lead to abuse and injustice. Patricia's actions were fueled by a sense of entitlement and a belief that she was above the rules. The HOA's initial inaction allowed her behavior to escalate, demonstrating the importance of checks and balances and the need for accountability in all forms of governance. Environmental protection is not just a matter for governments and corporations. It is a responsibility that falls on each and every one of us. Patricia's seemingly small act of dumping oil into the pool had significant environmental consequences, highlighting the importance of respecting our planet and taking care to avoid polluting our water sources. Community responsibility is essential for creating a thriving and harmonious society. That we all have a duty to look out for one another, to stand up for what is right, and to hold those who harm our community accountable for their actions. The residents of Harmony Glades, though divided, ultimately came together to demand justice and to rebuild their community. The saga of the HOA Karen is a cautionary tale, but it is also a story of hope and resilience. It shows that even in the face of adversity, we can overcome challenges, learn valuable lessons, and create a better future as we move forward. Let us remember the lessons of Harmony Glades. Let us be vigilant in guarding against the abuse of power, responsible in protecting our environment, and committed to building strong and resilient communities. Let us strive to create a world where justice prevails, where compassion triumphs over malice, and where everyone is treated with respect and dignity. The power to create such a world lies within each of us. That we must choose to use that power wisely and responsibly. The memory of the HOA Karen should not just be a story of suburban strife, but a call to action for creating better communities and a better world.